When you think of platformers, you always think of the big guys, like Mario, Sonic, Crash, Spyro, or any other kind of platformer character you can think of. But among all the characters you can think of, there is one that is always distinct to any Nintendo fan, which is Banjo-Kazooie. We all know about this game, we all know about its quality, and yeah, it's still great to this very day. The fun, colorful graphics, the amazing personalities, and the fun level design. It's still great, and it aged very well to this very day. And even around the time, Rare was just knocking out of the park. They started off as a contractor where they have publishers hire them to develop games. But the golden years didn't start until Nintendo bought them for a 25% stake, which ended up becoming 49% later on. And then Donkey Kong Country happened, and they were like, boy, look at these sexy 3D graphics. Donkey Kong Country is one of my favorite platformer series of all time. It's just so fun and very atmospheric. And they went really hard with the advertisement for this game, where they all like, this ain't from the 32X, this is on the SNES. And once it released, it became universally acclaimed thanks to its graphics, music, and very fun level design. They continued working with Nintendo on various projects, like various sequels to Donkey Kong, but they really started going somewhere with an RPG called Project Dream. However, they started having development issues with the game. They eventually transferred to the Nintendo 64, but then once they saw Mario 64 in action, they realized that Mario 64 will raise the standards. And so, to prevent themselves being lost in time, they decided to convert their RPG to an N64 3D platformer. With all that effort, we got Banjo-Kazooie. It's definitely one of Rare's greatest achievements, and that's kind of saying a lot because around that time, Rare was just killing it off the park, with their mostly known franchise being the Donkey Kong Country games for the Super Nintendo. There were a lot of platformers around that time. Some of them became world-renowned, and some of them became obscure. But for Banjo-Kazooie, they became one of the greats. And usually when a game becomes successful, they always make sequels, and there it is, Banjo-Tooie. This game tried to do more with Banjo-Kazooie. More levels, more moves, and more collectibles. While it was praised during the time, it did become a bit dated throughout the years. Not saying it's a bad game, but it just didn't have that sweet spot that Banjo-Kazooie did with level design and collectibles. Though the more I think about it, even Mario has a hard time with 3D collectibles sometimes. And don't get me started on Crash 4. But for the collectibles in Banjo-Kazooie, it wasn't the amount of collectibles that matter, it's what you do with it. And they complement the level design really well. For an example, in the first level, Mumbo's Mountain, there's this area with a chimpanzee. You can get 3 Jiggies in this section. The first one, you need to lure the chimpanzee to these icons. The second one, you need to give this orange to a monkey. And the third one, you need to shoot the chimpanzee. Banjo-Kazooie pretty much did what Mario 64 did, but refined it to near perfection. And with all this success and all this praise, and the next console coming up, they're bound to have more games coming up, right? This is when things get a bit rough. Rare only made one game on the GameCube, which was Star Fox Adventures, which wasn't really supposed to be a Star Fox game to begin with. And a few days later, the news struck the world. Microsoft bought Rare. Which is a move that people are still upset to this very day, and honestly, I don't blame them that much. Mostly because once they were bought by Microsoft, things went a bit downhill for Rare. And with Rare, all of their creative IPs, such as Banjo-Kazooie themselves, are now under the Xbox umbrella. However, the audience for Xbox is drastically different from Nintendo's. Nintendo audience are mostly based on family-friendly games like Mario, Kirby, or Pokemon. But for the Xbox audience, they're more of a shooter fans like Halo and stuff. Xbox tried to do the platformer thing with Blinks. However, around this time, the whole gaming industry changed. So games like these don't really fit in anymore. Now, not to say around this time, platformers are completely dead, like there was always stuff like Mario and Sonic and stuff, and we even had newcomers around this time like Sly, Ratchet, and Jak. However, for Banjo, we didn't get a game for them until a few years after Tooie. And the 2 games that released around then were Banjo-Kazooie, Grunty's Revenge, and Banjo Pilot. Grunty's Revenge is simply Banjo-Kazooie on the Game Boy Advance. It's pretty much that, what you hear is what you get. But for Banjo Pilot, it gets a bit more interesting because originally this wasn't going to be a Banjo game, but a sequel to Diddy Kong Racing. This game was supposed to release in 2002, but due to legal issues, they had to convert it to a Banjo game. You can actually still play this prototype if you look online. So basically, this game was so far in development that they decided to convert it into a Banjo game since they were owned by Microsoft at that time. Though what makes this strange is that they were still working on Donkey Kong even though they were owned by Microsoft. Albeit they were just remakes of older titles like the SNES and N64 games. And then a few years later, an Xbox E3 showcased a brand new Banjo-Kazooie game. The two big things that sticks out about this trailer is that Banjo looks ugly, and there's collectibles. And then the next trailer showed up, and then everyone was just asking, what the fuck is this? When this game was announced and released, there was just one massive question about this game. Why is Banjo-Kazooie a car game now? The answer people mostly think of is that, oh god, Microsoft must have done this. They hate platformers, so they must have sabotaged Banjo-Kazooie. But in reality, it's mostly Rare just not wanting to make a platformer anymore. Now, if you're wondering why we haven't had a Banjo-Kazooie game in years, it's mostly because Rare doesn't want to make a new one. This game was supposed to be a remake of Banjo-Kazooie similar to Conquer Live and Reloaded, but they had creative differences throughout the development. And this is our final product, a construction-based vehicle game. Now, on a personal level, I do enjoy Nuts and Bolts a lot, but it's not a game that people wanted. The best way to describe it is how Grant Kirkhope says it. Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts is a good game. It just shouldn't have had the Banjo IP with it. On that note, however, I just discovered this little preview of Nuts and Bolts, and So the main idea of Nuts and Bolts is that it takes place 8 years after the sequel, Banjo-Tooie. These two characters haven't done anything in 8 years, and they become super fat. Anyway, so once Grunty appears for the first time in years, they declare a match. And then suddenly this powerful king appears out of nowhere. And this is the part where people get pissed off. Remember, people are already pissed about the changed gameplay and everything, but just rub it in and saying that the old gameplay is just outdated. This is honestly distasteful, and this is not like Cranky Kong where he does mock the games, but it was more of a joke and lighthearted way. Fortunately, however, there was a positive for Banjo fans around this time. To go alongside Nuts and Bolts, 4J Studios created remastered versions of the first two games. And these are honestly the definitive way to play the original games. The game's in HD, it has widescreen, it fixed some of the issues of the first game had, and for Banjo-Tooie specifically, it has a significantly better frame rate. They even added back the famous stop and swap feature for Banjo-Kazooie. The rewards were mostly novelty, but it was cool to see this old feature come back in this way. And then, that was it. That was the last time we ever had new content in Banjo-Kazooie. Banjo appeared as a guest star in Sonic and All-Stars Racing. All three Banjo games were backwards compatible with Rare Replay, and then that was pretty much it throughout the years. Rare eventually had a bit of a Connect phase during their lives. It happens with most developers. But for most platformers around the 2010s, they mostly died, with only a few survivors happening around this time. However, there was a massive shift in the gaming industry over one thing: Kickstarters. There were tons and tons of indie platformer games kickstarted around this time. The big ones I could think of around this time was Shovel Knight, Shantae, A Hat in Time, and Mighty No. 9. But then one day, this Kickstarter appeared where it says a group of former Rare employees were trying to make a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. Banjo fans rejoiced and kickstarted the game instantly. I remember keeping eyes on this game throughout its entire development span. I wanted to get the Wii U version, but eventually that got cancelled for the Nintendo Switch. And once Ukulele came out, it was mostly mixed. People either hated it for not evolving the genre, or people loved it for its personalities and stuff. And this game released during the perfect time because 2017 and now is the revival era of platformers. But where does Banjo-Kazooie fit all of this? Well, during the hype for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Nintendo was choosing characters based on the Fighters ballot. And then, a few months after Smash Bros. Came out,
oh my gosh! They actually made it!
Nature has healed itself, as Banjo-Kazooie appeared in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. This was pretty much the biggest newcomer in the DLC, as just like K-Rool, this is the first time Banjo has appeared in anything in years. Now while I stopped caring about Smash Bros. After this DLC, honestly that was for the best. This was a great way to reintroduce these characters to a whole new audience. And then 2 years later, once Nintendo announced their N64 Online, they announced that Banjo-Kazooie is going to be on the Switch Online. So, we get to play Banjo-Kazooie on the Nintendo Switch. And honestly, it's really cool that even after all these years, Banjo was never left forgotten. Even years after Banjo-Kazooie hasn't appeared in a game at all, the fans really kept the series alive by making it relevant. And that relevancy allowed the characters to reappear on Nintendo console for the first time in decades. And let's talk about the composer of the Banjo-Kazooie series, Grant Kirkhope. Grant Kirkhope, even years after he left Rare, he never left the Banjo-Kazooie series side. He helps a lot with fan-made remixes. And just last year, he created a whole album of Banjo-Kazooie remixes. Now, here's just one big question for the series now. What's going to happen to the series in the future now? Well, since 2017, platforms became very relevant more than ever again, with constant, and I mean constant, revivals of old characters we haven't seen in years. Crash, Spyro, Ty, Klonoa, KO, they all came back. And yes, even Bubsy came back too. And we're seeing more companies release big 3D platformers. Hell, in 2021, half the nominations for Game of the Years were platformers. So there is a great market for platformers now. So it's pretty much the perfect time to revive the Banjo-Kazooie series. And Microsoft has bought several companies and studios that does great 3D platformers. People always say if they bring back Banjo, they should just remake the original games. I think it's not really necessary right now. Because one, unlike something like Crash or Spyro, you can play Banjo-Kazooie on modern consoles. And two, they were mostly made to reintroduce the original games to new audiences. Banjo-Kazooie pretty much got reintroduced to a new audience with his appearance in Smash Bros. And his promotion in Nintendo Switch Online. So I think it's time for a brand new and original game. Because we've been playing through the same levels of Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie for 2 decades now. So I think it's time for us to look for something new than just reliving the past again. Like, try to evolve the gameplay of Banjo-Kazooie. Just look at Crash Bandicoot. The original 3 games are still great to this day, but for Crash Bandicoot 4, they evolved the gameplay. It felt like a natural evolution to the original PS1 games. It tried to do its own thing without relying on the previous success of the PS1 games. And with that, this became my favorite Crash game of all time since Crash Bandicoot 2. Rare said that they are done with the Banjo-Kazooie series, but that doesn't mean the series should die. They should have a new studio and new blood try out the series. Have people who knows what to do with a 3D platformer and knows what to do with Banjo-Kazooie. Because the Banjo-Kazooie series has so much potential, but due to company ownership and demographic changing, it sadly faded away. But with his introduction in Smash Bros. And his appearance on the Switch Online, and we're in the era of revivals, it's a perfect time to revive the Banjo-Kazooie series. Anyway, so that'll do for today, so thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye bye!